The worst housing crash in 130 years. Let's have a look. Good morning, everyone. Florian.heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. I have my stein of coffee, and I thought we'd have a look at this article from the Sydney Morning Herald sent to me by a viewer, and it's discussing, well, literally throwing everything they can to prop up property. Literally. So let's have a look at this article, everyone. Using super to offset mortgages. Liberal MP calls for housing changes. Federal Liberal MP John Alexander warns the Australian housing market could face the worst price crash in 130 years without radical interventions. Now, there you go. Do you think that they will allow it? Do you think they will not intervene in the market to an extreme extent to avoid such a big price crash? I think they will do every single thing they can. Everything possible. I think too much of our civilization's wealth is tied up in housing. I think too much of the voter base of the LNP is tied up in housing. I think too much of the wealth of our politicians on all classes, all sides of politics, left, hard left, light left, all sides, are tied up in property. So they want to allow buyers to own homes within their superannuation and reduce retirement funds to offset mortgage repayments. Now, I would argue that we should be able to claim the interest costs on buying a primary residence against our tax. We should get a tax deduction for that. We should essentially be allowed, or we should be able to ensure there's a roof over our heads before we give money to the state. That might decrease the demand for social housing. As an architect, I've got lots of architecture connections on LinkedIn, and they're all talking about social housing. I'm the only one explaining, actually, you get a bigger bang for buck by investing in private housing. But, they don't see that. Mr. Alexander, who chaired a House of Representatives Economics Committee inquiry into home ownership in 2015, has crafted a raft of policy ideas to help the federal government steer the country out of an economic crisis that he believes could slash property prices if left unchecked. Mr. Alexander wants to give all super fund members the ability to use their retirement nest egg to buy a home, which would be a substantial shift in the existing rules. When the property owner then came to retirement, he said they could choose to take out a line of credit against their home, allowing the retiree to pull out capital gains and potentially draw down the principal to fund their retirement rather than rely on the pension. Wow. Just think about that. That means you'd be in debt forever. That means you would be in debt forever. You pay off your home, but then you take out a reverse mortgage, essentially, to get that money back, and you're paying interest on that. What do you think, everyone? What do you think about that idea? I think that's, in some ways, sounds horrible. It sounds horrible, but then it's better than having all these people relying on the pension. But it's completely dependent on capital gains. On capital gains of property. It'd be a constant trap of being in debt. In some ways, that sounds terrifying. Further, allowing superannuation balances to be used as an offset account would allow home buyers to more easily afford a home, Mr. Alexander said, as retirement funds would be used to reduce the interest payments on an outstanding mortgage. I don't mind that. If my superannuation is sitting in cash, why can't I get the advantage of that cash? I mean, the banks have the all money in clause. Sure, your super's probably protected, but this tool does not compromise the integrity of the superannuation account, as the offsetting account enables the individual to pay off their mortgage quicker, and therefore the property acts as a vehicle for retirement savings, his policy document explains. Maybe only an offset for your primary residence. Why not? I'm sure you could get better returns doing it elsewhere, but that is going to have a weekly impact on people's budgets. A couple $100,000, if you got it sitting there, just equal to your mortgage, decimating the entire interest, even $50,000, anything you got in there, it's got to make a difference. With 1 in 10 Australians on income, about 1 in 10 Australians on income support are set to lose the pandemic supplement payment worth $550 a fortnight in September, and the $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper payment is due to end simultaneously. At that point, unemployment is set to reach 8% on Treasury figures, compared to previous forecasts of 10%. We'll have to see what the actual underemployment is. Because right now, I combined using the Roy Morgan methodology, we're sitting at a combined underemployment and unemployment of about 25% of the workforce. It's different methodologies they use, everyone. I'm not a fan of the ABS one. I mean, 1 hour of work. We're facing the biggest contraction in the housing market we've seen since the 1890s, Mr. Alexander said. In the decade following a major property boom in the 1880s, house prices in some areas fell more than 50%. So there is historical precedent, everyone. I mean, how many people refer back to the 1890s, 1880s? I mean, John Adams, he mentioned it when he came on the show here. I have to organize another interview with him now that my work's relaxed a bit. But he was referring back to then. It took decades. People didn't see it return in their lifetime. I mean, just think about that, taking a 50% hit. Would you be okay if you took a 50% hit? Depends on your mortgage, guys. If you bought before property was booming, 50% hit, it's, it'll sting. So when we did the 2015 inquiry, the two triggers that we could see that would correct the market was either an increase in interest rates or a high level of unemployment where people can't pay rent. People won't be able to pay their mortgage, he said. Well, that's it. We're going to see, people already now are on rent strike, and people are already now on mortgage holidays. So people can't pay their mortgage, and people can't pay their rent. I don't want the public to lose their investments. I don't want them to lose their home. I don't want the banks to go under. And in turn, I don't want the government to have to shoulder the combination of all of these events. Mr. Alexander has previously spoken with Australian Banking Association Chief Executive Anna Bligh about his idea and has begun discussions with Treasury. The self-managed super funds can currently buy property. However, this is not allowed to be a principal place of residence. And that's the issue. Senator Andrew Bragg recommended in early June an expansion of the First Home Super Saver scheme to allow the use of mandatory super payments rather than only voluntary contributions. But Mr. Alexander's proposal does not involve taking money out of super. My idea was the house became a possession of your super, Mr. Alexander said. Mr. Alexander also proposed an Australian housing trust where investors own shares in a fund providing housing for essential workers who are able to co-own the homes or rent them at below-market costs. He hopes this combination of policies, in addition to curbs on investment outside the trust, would help stabilize property values. Wow. Talk about intervention into the property market. You've got to find a way of how do you bridge from this moment when the market is going to go way down. You've got to be working on it right now. A spokesman for the ABA confirmed Ms. Bligh had spoken with Mr. Alexander but declined to comment further. The federal member for Bennelong has previously advocated for caps on negative gearing tax deductibility and warned in 2017 the housing bubble was out of control as investors dominated sales. His 2015 inquiry revealed evidence home ownership had fallen to its lowest point in 60 years. Home ownership spreads wealth. It empowers consumers. It creates stability, he said. And he's right there. He's 100% right there. You want a civilization where the majority of your citizens can own their own home and can be debt-free. That is what we want. That is what we want. And that will instantly evaporate a lot of the inequalities that we have. Because people will have confidence, they'll have stability, they'll have an emergency resource they can draw upon. They won't be at the whim of a landlord. But we'll have to see, guys. Some of his ideas I quite like. Some of them scare me. Some of them really scare me. The idea of being in perpetual debt and then getting a reverse mortgage and taking it out. What do you think about this one, guys? What do you reckon? Do you like some of his ideas? Are you worried? Do you think it's just going to perpetuate the housing bubble? What about the essential employees low-cost housing idea and investing in that? Would you want your super? Would you invest in that? I mean, ethically, it seems like a good idea. But then who is an essential worker? It just seems like another perk for civil servants. As always, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on YouTube. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon or eBay or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can buy our merch at HeiseSays. You can also use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint or support us via PayPal. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.